Bibliophiles of the internet. As a proud gamer, as in Gaymer, and someone who has weirdly read quite a few nerdy game-related queer books in recent years, I thought I would share the wealth and either recommend or suggest some queer books that you can read if you also enjoy gaming. This is pretty self-explanatory, I think, but I will also add that even though I was originally going to share queer books involving video games specifically, I opted to go with an expanded definition of gaming, and I'm going to be including some queer books about tabletop gaming and board games as well. Now, I am drawing the line at books that are inspired by gaming or video game IP or tabletop role-playing games because that covers such a wide variety of things. There are so many fantasy books, for example, that play into a lot of RPG archetypes or that would be great for fans of specific games, but I really wanted these books to include the activity and element of gaming itself. Hopefully that makes some kind of sense. I think you'll catch on pretty quickly. A grand majority of these books are like super fun nerdy fiction, but I think it's only right to start with a book that inspired this video, which happens to be nonfiction. That is Video Games Have Always Been Queer by Bo Ruberg. If you were on my channel at any point towards the end of last year, I'm sure you've heard me talk about this book numerous times, but Bo Ruberg is a queer scholar and professor whose research lies at the intersection of game theory, technology, queer studies, and gender studies. In this book, they're arguing for the queer potential of video games, by which I mean exploring and excavating experiences of queerness in video games that goes far beyond just queer characters or overtly queer storylines in video games. In every chapter, the author dissects a specific game and puts it in conversation with a related piece of queer theory, thereby extracting how we can identify and express queerness as gamers within those games based on game mechanics, thematic undertones and overtones, and even methods of play. This book is like exactly my niche of special interests, and I love that it's very thoroughly and effectively making the case for how video games have both queerness and queer potential built into them and built into their very mechanics regardless of intent and regardless of content. I think it's a really remarkable homage to the experience of queerness, which is not limited to just labels and identities and relationships. So much of being queer is carving our own paths, creating meaning where language and systems of power fail us, using tools and ideas in ways they were not intended to be used, and this book profoundly understands that in the context of video games. Listen, I could talk so much more about this book, but suffice to say, I highly recommend it, especially if this is also your niche. It is just fantastic. I also want to give some quick shout-outs to a couple of Bo Ruberg's other books because they've written a lot about this intersection between gaming and queerness, as you can imagine. Another one of their books that may be of interest is called How to Queer the World. From what I understand, this book is all about what video games can teach us about the concept of world building, not just narratively and not just in media, but also how can the freedom and possibility of the worlds we can create within games translate to ways that we can reimagine and reconstruct the real world and real structures around us. They also have another book called The Queer Games Avant-Garde, where they interview 22 queer video game developers to learn about their creative process and practices, where they see their role in the industry, how they see the industry shifting or not, and how they understand the future of the industry itself, which also sounds deeply fascinating. Moving on to fiction, a book that immediately came to mind as I was planning this video was The Love Club by Leo Min. This is a gnarly, intense YA contemporary sci-fi story about these four best friends whose initials spell out the word love, and they used to be a very tight-knit, inseparable group. But 3 years ago, Elle mysteriously disappeared, and soon afterwards, Liberty and Vera also moved away, which left O alone with her grief. But when senior year rolls around, Liberty and Vera actually return to their hometown, and even though the Love Club's 3 remaining members once bonded over being outcasts and gamers, they just can't seem to pick up where they left off and find a way to reconnect. But one night, all 3 of them are drawn to their old clubhouse, where they discover a PC with a strange game loaded up for them to play. A game that was not only created by the missing Elle, but that might help them discover the truth behind her disappearance. Listen, I'm not gonna lie to you, this can be a really grim, harrowing story at times that explores things like child abuse, suicide and suicide ideation, self-harm, disordered eating, and so many other things. But at the same time, it's a really innovative and interesting take on navigating so many different shades of grief. This is just a really powerful, striking story that's really unlike so much of what's currently in the YA market, so I would definitely recommend it. You could also check out ASL by Jean Thornton. This is a dual timeline story partially set in the late 90s and partially set in the 2010s, following a group of queer and trans friends who meet in some kind of online forum in the 90s and begin developing a video game together that they call Saga of the Sorceress. But something happens between them, a rift forms in their friendship, and the one leading the project basically shutters the game entirely and cuts themselves off from the rest of the group, effectively causing everyone to lose touch. 18 years pass, and these former friends have now come out as either queer or trans, and they're all living less than remarkable lives. But when they all learn that they've somehow ended up living around the same area, they realize this could be a chance to finally finish the game they started all those years ago, and also finally meet each other face to face. In the interest of full disclosure, I liked this book, but personally I did not love it. But I do appreciate how bold, experimental, and in-your-face the story is. But one of my favorite parts of this story is how it parallels video games to the experience of transness, especially in regards to what it means to exact agency over a body, what it means to occupy a world with permeable boundaries, and the capitalistic urge to gamify our own transition and our own existence. So again, this may not have been my favorite book in the world, but I still think it's doing a lot of worthwhile things, and I still think it's worth checking out. On a very different note, there's also Glitch Girl by Rainey Owett. This is a middle grade verse novel about a young non-binary trans girl who goes by Jay, and Jay is also navigating a recent ADHD diagnosis on top of their already established autism diagnosis. Jay is also obsessed with this video game called Coaster Boss, basically a fictional version of Roller Coaster Tycoon, where they can design theme parks and roller coasters and exact control over all the park attendees, which is a welcome contrast to all the other scary, uncontrollable parts of their life. Jay is also struggling to navigate and regulate their neurodivergencies, and they're also trying to understand their obsessive crush on a classmate named Junie, which is even more confusing when they try to figure out whether Junie is someone they want to be or someone they want to date. Again, just to be fully transparent, this can definitely be a heavy story at times. It explores things like ableism, bullying, child abuse, patterns of self-harm, especially in ways that don't pull any punches. But at the same time, the story provides a deep sense of escape and catharsis. I think this book uses the vehicle of video games as a metaphor especially effectively, because you immediately understand why this game is such an important fixture in Jay's life. It's something that lends them a sense of control and allows them to build and navigate worlds that they actually understand and know how to operate, with rules that they clearly understand and can choose to either follow or break. Video games are such a powerful metaphor for self-creation in this story. I think if you're able to engage with it, it's very much worth the read. I've also heard really good things about Single Player by Tara Tai. This is an adult workplace romance. It's about a video game writer named Kat who's finally landed her dream job where she can combine her two favorite things in life, video games and romance. So she's writing the romantic storylines for a major upcoming game, which she's super excited about. But she's less excited when she meets her boss, Andy, who is a certified hater of happily ever afters and also annoyingly hot. Andy is concerned that focusing too much on romantic storylines will make their game seem less serious compared to their competitors, so they really want to cut back on those stories and characters. But then the game's funders insist that they add even more romance in order to make the game more appealing to female fans. So Andy and Kat are trying to navigate this careful balance of how much romance to write into the game. They're dealing with all these misogynistic industry standards, and of course they're begrudgingly attracted to each other even though they don't necessarily see eye to eye. Like I said, this just sounds like a really fun, nerdy, queer romance. It also seems like it's having worthwhile discussions about how romance is not seen as having merit for its own sake, how patriarchy and misogyny impact and shape the video game industry, and what it means for a game and just a story in general to have quote-unquote mass appeal. So it seems like there's a lot here to unpack and enjoy. Another book I've heard good things about is Take a Bow, Noah Mitchell by Tobias Madden. This seems like the perfect intersection for folks who are fans of both video games and theater. It's about a teenager named Noah who happens to be in love with his best friend, but his best friend is someone he's only ever met online. Noah only knows him by his gaming avatar and nothing else, and there's pretty much zero chance that they'll ever meet face to face. But one day Noah sees an opportunity to secretly meet his crush, but it means he'll have to join a local production of Chicago, deal with his self-obsessed mom, and actually sing and dance in front of a live audience. But maybe love is worth the risk? I don't really know much more about this than that. The official synopsis is very vague and very sparse. There's no explanation as to why this local production of Chicago Chicago is the key to Noah meeting his online crush, but you know what? It sounds like a good time nonetheless. This next book is a very recent release, and I'm not sure if any of the characters are canonically queer, but the author is queer and trans, and I happen to think we should support queer and trans artists even when their art is not explicitly about queerness or transness, so I'm going to include it anyways. That is Fathom Fall by Matteo L. Cirilli, which just came out on March 3rd. This is billed as The Maze Runner meets Fortnite. It's an action-packed dystopian thriller about a video game called Fathom Fall and a teenager named Wyatt who happens to rank number 3 in the game. But in real life, his parents are head engineers at Hydrexo, the company that makes up 75% of North America's water source. The majority of the population has to line up and pay incredibly high prices to access water at public water taps, which Wyatt does not have to deal with. So Wyatt really wants to prove that he's not a spoiled, privileged brat and that he can really make a name for himself by winning an upcoming Fathom Fall tournament. But when he starts seeing Bloodites, the water-guzzling monsters from the game, in real life, he begins to suspect that this competition is about much more than just the grand prize. I read Bad in the Blood by Matteo L. Cirilli last year and really enjoyed it. It was actually another one of my favorite books of the year. This one sounds like a really cool, edgy, in-your-face, speculative thriller that doubles as a takedown of corporate power and exploitation, so sign me up any day of the week. You can also check out L.O.V.E. and Video Games by Zachary Sergi. This story is pitched as Heartstopper meets Ready Player One. It's about a gay 18-year-old mythology nerd with chronic pain named Keegan who is obsessed with this myth-inspired online video game called Pantheonic. He's actually a top player in the game, and he also plays with a really great team, and he also happens to have a secret crush on his teammate, Alex. No one else knows that he's struggling with chronic pain, but when a quest in the game turns out to be a secret invitation for an in-person tournament in New York City, Keegan will have to try and manage his pain so that his team can attend this once-in-a-lifetime event. I haven't read this one yet myself, but I think it sounds really great. I love that the story sits at the intersection of nerdiness, queerness, and disability, which we don't see nearly enough of. Also, as a mythology nerd and video game enthusiast myself, I just think it sounds really interesting and fun. Transitioning to the more tabletop side of things, of course I recommend The No Girlfriend Rule by Kristen Randall, another one of my favorite books that I read in 2025. This is a really sweet YA coming-of-age story about Hollis, who is fat and bisexual and very anxious. She really wants to get into the world of SNS, which is a super popular TTRPG that her boyfriend plays, but her boyfriend's SNS group has a strict no-girlfriend rule, which means Hollis will have to find a completely new group of people to play with. She sees a flyer advertising an all-girls SNS group, which she decides to join despite her anxiety trying to convince her otherwise, which leads her to discover unexpected friendships and all kinds of epic adventures. This is a super fun, nerdy, heartwarming story. It's very much about realizing the difference between the kind of love we accept for ourselves and the kind of love we truly deserve. It's also a really beautiful story of friendship and self-discovery, and I think it's a really wonderful love letter to how tabletop RPGs encourage imagination in more ways than one. On a very similar note, we also have to talk about Roll for Love by M.K. England. This is a sapphic second chance YA romance about D&D nerd Harper, whose summer is off to a pretty rough start. She and her mom move across the country to a small town in Virginia where they plan to help out on her poppy's farm, which means saying goodbye to her friends and having to find a new D&D group to play with. One day she runs into Ollie, her neighbor, former childhood best friend, and first crush, who happens to plan on spending the summer hanging out with her friends and playing D&D for the first time. She, of course, invites Harper to join her D&D group, and suddenly feelings seem to be developing between Harper's barbarian character and Ollie's paladin, leading them to wonder if it's just a part of the game or whether they're also falling for each other in real life. This is another one I haven't read yet myself, but I really want to. Even though they're completely different stories, it seems to have a lot of overlap with the No Girlfriend Rule, which also has two sapphics whose RPG characters are falling for each other in the game while they navigate their own feelings in real life. If this book is able to balance that real-life romantic drama with the characters' gameplay in that same way, I think it could be really fun. If you're more into anthologies and short stories, I have great news for you because Rosie Thor recently edited a super nerdy D&D inspired anthology called This Is How We Roll, which includes stories by M.K. England, Johnny Gazavia, Margaret Owen, Jamie Paxton, and Andrew Joseph White, just to name a few. This anthology is billed as a celebration of TTRPGs as a rite of queer passage, where so many players get a chance to explore gender, sexuality, relationships, self, and queer existence across vast worlds with completely different rules and possibilities. Again, haven't read this one myself, but I think it sounds great. Obviously, so many of the queer authors contributing to this anthology are TTRPG fans and players themselves, so I'm really curious to see how that element of tabletop gaming plays into each of these authors' pieces. A really cute middle grade trilogy I just discovered while researching titles for this video is called Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Club, written by Lee Knox Ostertag and illustrated by Xanth Boma. I believe this is a middle grade graphic novel novel series that starts with two friends, Jess and Olivia, who despise middle school and always look forward to escaping into sprawling fantasy worlds of their own creation. And to that end, they have recently discovered D&D. They begin experimenting with D&D by just playing very small campaigns by themselves. Olivia is the dungeon master and Jess is the solo party member. But when Olivia wants to add some new players to the group, Jess will have to decide whether their ongoing campaign, and perhaps their friendship, can withstand all this change. Again, just to be clear, I'm unsure whether queerness is explicitly explored or represented in this series, but I do know that the creators are both queer and trans themselves, which counts for something, in my opinion. But either way, I think this sounds like a really great series for young readers and graphic novel fans alike. It seems like an exciting, accessible introduction to D&D for younger audiences especially, and seems to feature a young cast of characters really coming into their own in so many ways. Lastly for today, another book I just discovered while researching for this video and thought I would include is Bored to Death by C.J. Connor. I believe this is the first book in a series of queer, cozy, game-related murder mysteries. This story takes place in Salt Lake City and follows a queer character named Ben who just came back to his small hometown to help run his family's board game shop and cafe. Despite his steady clientele of gamers, Ben is barely making enough money to keep the store running and also stay on top of his dad's medical expenses. That's when a local toy and game collector named Clive offers him the chance to buy a rare edition of the Landlord's Game, which is the game that inspired Monopoly, but he's offering it for a suspiciously low price that seems too good to be true. It's not long after Ben turns the offer down that Clive turns up dead in the dumpster behind Ben's shop, and a backpack full of thousands of dollars appears on his doorstep, making Ben the primary suspect in Clive's death. So now Ben will have to team up with the very cute local florist if he wants to prove his innocence. Again, this just sounds like a really fun time. If you're someone who loves your queer romances with a side of cozy mystery and intrigue, then I think this could be a great choice. As always, this is not intended to be a definitive nor exhaustive list, it's just a handful of titles I happen to know about that fit this very niche prompt. If you know any other books that fit the bill, I'd love to hear about them, so feel free to drop those recs down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself and others, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page.